ready to dig into another juicy topic. Today, we're tackling a question that's been around, well, probably as long as cannabis itself. Does it actually make you lazy?
Ah, the age-old lazy stoner stereotype.
Exactly. Picture this. Someone's glued to the couch, maybe surrounded by snacks, completely out of it. But is that really an accurate portrayal of cannabis users? Or just a tired cliche? We're going deep on this one, looking at some fascinating research to uncover what's really going on.
Sounds intriguing.
It is. We're diving into a Psychology Today Australia article that really breaks down the science. And they explore some recent research published in, get this, social psychological and personality science. Get you right.
Definitely rolls right off the tongue.
Right. But anyway, they actually found a link between cannabis use and a dip in what's called self-regulation. Makes you wonder, right?
It does make you think. Does that automatically equal laziness, though?
Well, that's the thing. It's not that simple.
Okay, so walk me through this. What exactly does that even mean, a dip in self-regulation?
So think of it like this. Self-regulation is basically our ability to control our impulses, stay focused, that kind of thing.
Right, got it.
So a dip in that might mean you're a bit more relaxed, less worried about keeping everything perfectly in order. Like maybe you're okay with a little more spontaneity in your life.
Okay, so less rigid, more go with the flow.
Exactly. It's not that you can't get things done, it's just you're less likely to stress about the small stuff.
Interesting. So it's more of a subtle shift in your mental state, not necessarily a complete inability to function.
Precisely. And get this, the study found absolutely no connection between being high and a decrease in actual motivation.
Really?
Yeah. People who use cannabis regularly were just as willing to put in effort while high as when they were sober.
Well, that's pretty telling. It really challenges that whole stoner equals slacker assumption.
Right. And speaking of misconceptions, let's talk about the dreaded weed hangover. We've all heard the stories, feeling foggy, sluggish the day after using cannabis, but is there any truth to that?
Well, that's another one we can likely put to rest. The research didn't find any evidence of lingering negative effects on mood, motivation, or mental clarity after the high wore off.
So those feelings of being hungover, if they even exist, are probably due to something else entirely, not the cannabis itself.
It seems that way, yeah. It's important to remember that the effects of cannabis are temporary. Once the high subsides, so do those noticeable impacts.
It makes you wonder then, if the science doesn't really back it up, why is this stereotype so incredibly pervasive? Why do we still automatically picture someone melting into the couch after using cannabis?
Right, you'd think we'd have moved past that by now. It's a complex issue, no doubt. I think part of it might be that we tend to gravitate toward the most extreme examples, or those anecdotal stories, even if they aren't really representative of everyone's experience.
So individual experiences might be skewing our perception of a much larger group.
Exactly. Plus, let's not forget, for a very long time, cannabis use was demonized, surrounded by stigma. That kind of negative portrayal, especially in popular culture and media, that stuff sticks with people. It influences how we see things, even subconsciously.
That makes sense. It's like those deeply ingrained stereotypes, those biases, they're tough to shake even when presented with evidence that contradicts them.
Absolutely. It's ingrained in our cultural narrative,
Mhm.
which is why it's so important to have these conversations, to really look at the research objectively.
So if it's not about some inherent laziness, what is motivating people to use cannabis then?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And this study, they actually offer some interesting insight. It found that people who use cannabis regularly, they mainly do it because, well, they enjoy the feeling.
So they're not using it to escape life or shirk responsibilities. It's more about seeking out a certain experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's about how it makes them feel.
And that actually sparks another thought. We've been discussing how cannabis can make us a bit less inhibited, right? Could that actually make certain tasks, certain activities more enjoyable?
Ooh, that's a really interesting angle. I mean, this specific study, they didn't really go into that directly. It's definitely impossible, right? Like, think about it. Those activities that could benefit from a more relaxed state of mind.
Yeah, like being more free-flowing.
Exactly, like brainstorming sessions or anything creative, really, when you're trying too hard to be creative and you hit a wall.
Totally. So maybe a little less self-censorship in those moments would actually be helpful.
Right. It's like loosening up those mental filters a bit, you know? And this is making me think about some other research we came across um, about the link between cannabis and creativity. Didn't Scientific American do a piece on that?
They did. I remember that one. They talked about how cannabis can lead to what's called divergent thinking, which is essentially the ability to generate a wider range of ideas.
There you go. So it can help people think outside the box, make connections that they wouldn't have otherwise. And that's like the foundation of creative thinking.
And I remember another article, maybe from Harvard Health, that looked at how cannabis can even enhance sensory experiences, like making music sound richer or food taste more vibrant.
Oh, absolutely. That heightened sensory awareness,
Hmm?
it makes sense that it could boost creativity. Just imagine being more in tune with those subtle details, the nuances that you normally miss. It's like experiencing things with a fresh perspective.
Okay, so we've been focusing a lot on debunking this lazy stoner myth, which is important, but to be fair, it's worth acknowledging that cannabis use isn't without any potential downsides, right?
Right. Got to keep it balanced for sure.
There were a few potential risks mentioned in the research, weren't there?
Yeah. And it's definitely important to be aware of those. So one thing that came up was a study published in JAMA Psychiatry, I think it was. They found a correlation between heavy cannabis use starting in adolescence and an increased risk of certain mental health conditions, like psychosis, for example.
So not necessarily saying cannabis directly causes these conditions, more like an association.
Exactly. It's complex, and we need a lot more research to fully understand that link.
It's about being informed and weighing those potential risks and benefits. And of course, how cannabis affects someone, it can vary depending on the method of consumption too, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, smoking, vaping, edibles, they can all lead to really different experiences.
Right. You hear about that with edibles, especially.
Yeah, they tend to have a more delayed effect, and it can be more intense compared to smoking or vaping. And that's because when you eat an edible, the THC, it gets metabolized through the liver, and that leads to a different kind of high.
That's why there are all those cautionary tales about edibles, people having those strong, sometimes unexpected reactions, especially if they're new to it.
Exactly. Dosage is so important, and knowing your tolerance level.
For sure. So if someone is new to cannabis, maybe considering trying it out, what would you say is the most important thing to keep in mind?
Start low and go slow, especially with edibles. And just as important, make sure you're getting your cannabis from a reputable, legal source.
Mhm.
Got to be safe. And of course, be aware of the laws and regulations in your area.
Great advice. Always better to be safe than sorry.
But getting back to the heart of our deep dive, the lazy stoner stereotype, it seems like we can finally put that one to rest, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it really does seem that way. This whole deep dive has really shown just how much those stereotypes we hear, they don't always match up with what's really going on.
It all comes down to nuance, right?
Yeah.
Cannabis is like anything else. It affects people in different
Yeah.
ways. Trying to simplify it to like one stereotype, like lazy stoner, that just doesn't cut it.
And those stereotypes, they can have real impacts too, not just on how people see each other, but even on policies and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about like some harmless stereotype. It's about pushing back against misinformation that can really do some damage.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, this whole look at the lazy stoner myth, what would you say is the main thing you hope people take away from it all?
I think the biggest thing is just realizing that, cannabis use, it doesn't fit neatly into one little box. It affects everyone differently. And there's just so much more to it than these oversimplified stereotypes.
So, really looking beyond those preconceived ideas we all have.
Yeah. Engaging with the science, with the research,
Yeah.
and having an open mind about it all.
Totally. Well, that about wraps it up for this quote unquote lazy stoner myth. It really is a tired old trope that needs to go away. Cannabis, it can have a temporary effect on self regulation. We talked about that. But that doesn't automatically mean someone is lazy or lacks motivation.
And like we've been saying, more often than not, people who use cannabis, they're choosing it because they genuinely enjoyed the feeling. It's not an excuse for them to just be inactive.
It all comes down to personal experience and individual responses. Making informed choices, just like with anything else. Thanks for exploring this fascinating topic with us. We'll catch you on the next one.